So welcome to this week's episode of the Python People podcast with me, Guy Bevington, the MD of TrueNorth Recruitment Group. And this week, I'm honoured to be joined by a fellow Guy, Guy Maskall. Guy, how the devil are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well.
Good to see. Just a couple of guys hanging out on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, it's not often that we encounter other guys, really, is it?
Not. You're already my favourite podcast guest of all time, just for having the same name.
Guy,
a rare breed.
Guy².
I like that. We'll go with that. Guy, welcome. Thank you very much for coming today to have a chat with us. And I guess, by way of introduction, for those people that are yet to have the pleasure, you are the head of data science for a business called Rezatec. And give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself in a moment, but to sort of frame the chat today and sort of why we thought it was good for us to get together and put the world to rights. So we had a chat a few weeks ago when we sort of got into talking a bit about data science strategy and kind of how different companies are geared up for it and how their departments are sort of structured, etc. And we thought it would be quite useful to just maybe unpick this whole ball of twine that is the world of data science in terms of kind of why we need it and what companies need to do to actually make it work and so on and so forth. And obviously somebody of your caliber and your experience would be I'm sure have some very, very good opinions and insights into that. So we thought, let's get together, we'll do a podcast on it, and here we are. So before we get into all of that, do you want to just maybe tell us a little bit about your background, your career to date, and how we've got to where we are today?
Sure. So once upon a time, I was a young boy, always interested in science, how the world worked, wanted to be a scientist, figured I'd go stay at university. I didn't end up staying at university, but I did get my physics degree. That led on to a MSc in space science, which nearly led on to a PhD at UCL, but that sort of fell through for one reason or another. And so I found myself working at a government research agency, the Defence Evaluation Research Agency in Malvern, working on radar data. And that was sort of where I got to work on my PhD. So because that was one thing that appealed to me about them, because one thing that I said at the interview is I'd like to do a PhD, and they said yep, we support that. I thought, right, great. And so I ended up, and it was somewhat project led. If you're sponsored by someone, you're going to end up working on what fits their project. And so I ended up working not really on a very physicsy thing, but in this sort of applied maths area, sort of in the sort of application called automatic target recognition, which you'd really recognize today as another sort of name, or it came under the banner of statistical pattern recognition, which people would know of today as really machine learning. And so particularly detection, it's basically classification. And so I ended up doing my PhD in machine learning, as you would call it these days. And back in the days before scikit-learn existed, so I was coding a radial basis function network in Fortran. None of this importing stuff from sklearn. So people today don't know that they're born. So I ended up getting a PhD in machine learning whilst working. It was called Kinetic by that point.
Oh yeah.
And I got sort of fed up with there for one reason or another, and took the opportunity to leave with redundancy. And then I saw a startup at Harwell calling for exactly the mix of skills that I'd developed from my PhD. And from a PhD in getting into machine learning, I'd really got sort of tuned into the maths that was involved in machine learning, which was an interesting sort of side turn for me. And so this startup at Harwell was calling for sort of a bunch of stuff. This is not Rezatec. it so happens that this startup at Harwell was Cobalt Light Systems. And at Cobalt Light Systems, they were developing an application for Raman spectroscopy. So there I developed the processing system algorithms for the liquid explosive detection system. And that led to the winning the 2014 McRobert Award from the Royal Academy of Engineering for that product for the team, which was really, really satisfying. And Cobalt was acquired by Agilent Technologies in 2017, and that was a good time to move on, because it was partly job done, and also partly I'm not a massive fan of like the big enterprise sort of behemoths, and found my way to be lead data scientist at Cloud Factory, where I got to really benefit from being able to work in the cloud there. So that got me really sort of tuned into working on AWS. And unfortunately, after a fundraising round there, they had a restructuring, decided to sort of pretty much, sort of get rid of the UK office. And so then found myself looking again, and then ended up back at Harwell with Rezatec, which is where I am now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for that. That's very, very impressive journey so far in the world of data science. I'm always fascinated by how people arrive in the world of data science, because it is, I think, still to a more or less degree one of those kind of sexy areas of tech that people are kind of drawn to, and but it's great because I guess prior to sort of focusing on data science, I did a lot of work in the software engineering field, and a lot of people kind of came from quite a classic route of STEM background, maybe computer science, went into software engineering. It's quite a logical progression, where as with data science, one of the things I'm always really interested in is people's backgrounds before they arrive in it, because it seems to me one of those areas of tech where it does bridge quite nicely between the technology and the business, and you can often find people have actually come at it from lots of different angles, but they just enjoy the marriage of those things together. But obviously it sounds like you've clearly come from a very statistical and kind of numeric background, and it was quite a logical choice for you to sort of progress in this field, bearing in mind you were impressive.
Yeah, it's always the very sort of, it's always very hard, it's a hard numerical sort of data background that I come from, so radar data and then spectroscopy data. So it's very much sort of numeric, high dimensional sort of data world that I come from, and doing sort of classification analysis, developing algorithms for that kind of data. So I'm not sort of a, particular like sort of churn modeling or sort of time series forecasting or natural language processing person per se. It's that sort of numeric background. And in fact, I kind of found myself in data science, or as a data scientist, by accident, because I think Cobalt's job advert was for scientific programmer or scientific data analyst, maybe something like that, because I've been like a research scientist at Kinetic. And so when I started at Cobalt, I think they literally just plucked a contract template out the drawer, and sort of realized later on that it had me down as a software developer. And I was in the software team, and it is a small company, so in a way sort of small odds, but I was sort of like, over time I was like tugging on sort of my manager's sleeve and saying, really not a software developer, I'm not doing what sort of like kind of you and the other software developer does. So eventually we got around to sort of, okay, let's make it more appropriate. What job title kind of do you want? And we sort of like mooted a few possibilities, and data science was one that was one of the options. Bear in mind, this was maybe 2011, because I started with them late 2010, so it might have been 2011. I can't remember exactly what year it was. And data science wasn't particularly a big, I think, job title then. It was starting to get a bit hyped but maybe in 2012, something like that ish. And we hit upon data scientist because it was like one of the options that had been mooted. It's like, well, okay, yeah, I'm a scientist. I work with data. So that kind of makes sense. And so it was in entire ignorance of this burgeoning field outside. And it was a happy coincidence, really, because then identifying as a data scientist, I started to pick up on these other references to data science, which in turn led me to connect with a whole new community of people using these kinds of techniques, using R or using Python. And so I connected with them that way, but after sort of finding myself as a data scientist rather than thinking, hey, I want to be one of those data scientist things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of one of those things that sort of sneakily, snuck on the scene, wasn't it? And it's weird. I don't know why I remember this, but I do remember the exact place and time where I was when I was with a candidate. I went for a beer with a candidate in Hammersmith because I placed him at a company called Wrap in Hammersmith. There's a guy called Steve Papper. He was an episode developer at the time, and I went for a beer, and I remember him saying to me, it was about 2010. Oh, have you heard of these? What you want to be recruiting for now, guys? Is data scientists. And I was like, what? I never heard of the
what
term.
what are they then?
Yeah, I know. I was like, wow, that sounds cool, but I don't know what the hell that is. And it's kind of like 10 years ago, I guess. But why do you feel then that data science has had this huge? Because I guess if you go to most people, not even from a technology point of view, but just most stakeholders in the business now, they've heard of data science, and they kind of, and hopefully in some businesses they're very aware of it and know actually what it's done for the business as well in some instances. But why do you think that data science has had such a huge uptake and kind of rise in popularity over the last few years in relation, in comparison to other areas of tech?
So I suppose from the business perspective, pessimistically, I'd say it's because of a load of hype and misconceptions that if you sprinkle this magic pixie dust called data science around, wonderful things will just happen. Optimistically, I'd say that businesses have become more data literate and are simply aware of the value that data and data science can provide and want to leverage that. Realistically, I would say that there's a sort of often horrible or jarring mishmash of those two worldviews. And so you could end up sort of having to do a bit of education at times in order to as a data scientist. But on the candidate front, I think, again, sort of on like the negative side, the pessimistic side, there is far too much hype about the power of machine learning, especially under the AI branding, whatever that AI thing is. And a lot of candidates think that, hey, I can import from scikit-learn, or I followed an online tutorial with TensorFlow in order to do some yet another computer vision project, and that I can stroll into some sort of tech company or some company and be one of these rock star things with this sexiest job of the 21st century. So I think there's often a sort of reality check for them at some point in that journey. But optimistically, again, on the candidate front, what we've seen over the last, certainly 10 years, probably more recently, is a rise of what seems now like a seemingly infinite range of online learning opportunities, because data science is constantly changing. The tool stack, tech stack is constantly changing, and there is just more and more to learn all the time, it seems. So to be able to learn stuff, to be able to keep on top of that, the availability of this wealth of online learning opportunities has really been a massive enabler for people to pick up fundamental skills that they need. So I think that is that's definitely a big help, because undoubtedly huge amount of people want to be data scientists, actual data scientists, they're getting into it, they're learning what they need, they're keeping up to date through all of these online learning opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think I like the fact you came at it from both angles there, the optimist and the pessimist. Gave a very nice balanced view.
Yeah, there is scope for a bit more clarity in this field. I mean, data analysts, I think, saw this burgeoning sort of job title as a way to get a pay rise by basically doing the same job. So you've ended up with people sort of getting a job as a data scientist, thinking that they're going to be doing sexy machine learning, AI, and they end up running SQL queries in order to populate Tableau or Power BI dashboards, or where data scientists create, machine learning model after machine learning model, when in actual fact, that's not what the business needs.
Yeah.
It would just wanted some good solid insight from a wealth of data that it had. And so all of these activities can get called data science. So it's become this sort of big bucket that everybody's wanted to pile into. And then once they're in that bucket, sort of people start looking at each other and going, well, you do something totally different to what I do. What are we here for?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's quite funny actually. Somebody gave me a really funny, quite an interesting analogy the other day of saying that data science is a bit like sex as a teenager. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody wants to be doing it, but nobody knows how to do it. And when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that's actually quite true in many instances. But I suppose with that in mind, I mean, what in your experience then? And I totally understand your point there about existing roles in data being morphed into data science for the sake of data science. Sometimes you lift up under the hood of data science departments sometimes and see what the majority of people are actually doing in the team. And like I said, it is just often could just be purely data analysis, and actually there isn't a huge amount of kind of ML or statistical modeling or anything that's involved within it. So I think there is this kind of, like you say, because it's very a la mode, it's the sexy thing to seem to be doing, but actually what is the strategy behind it? And, is it actually what the business needs, like you said? But from your experience so far, I mean, what do you find often can be the blockers to effectively being able to implement data science effectively for a business?
I would say fundamentally, I think you mentioned the strategy, the word strategy, and it's strategy and infrastructure. Even from talking to people, looking around time and time again, I see businesses that really have little clear idea what a data-enabled business strategy might look like. And they think that hiring data scientists will be it. That's all they need to do for a data strategy. And unicorns will sort of dance past the window, sort of, pooping rainbows. And I mean, I hesitate to use the analogy that sort of, there's a lot of bright people working in business. There's a lot of, in senior leaderships even, there'll be a lot of motivations. There'll be founders that were really motivated to start something. There'll be sort of finance people charged with, managing the revenue, etc. But I think there's surprisingly a lack of real understanding. I'll probably come under fire for this, but hopefully people will see what I mean. Even at the C-level, there's possibly a bit of a misunderstanding about how finance works. And what I mean by that is that you see, and there is a theme of this, startups getting VC funding to fuel growth. And what does that VC want? They want to see growth. So the startup is driven to demonstrate growth kind of almost at any cost in order to get to the next round of VC funding. And the cycle continues like this until at some point the business crashes and burns because they've spent so much effort chasing growth to sort of support that next injection of funding that they didn't build the fundamentals. And I see this with data as well. So leaders sort of, think, oh, we need to like chase this sort of this latest tech stack, in the belief that sort of following in the footsteps of these big tech companies, the same success will rub off on them. But you can't just copy someone else's tech stack and have success happen. So yes, the tech absolutely is a wonderful enabler, but you've got to have a clear idea what it is that you want it to enable. What do you want to use that tech for? And that's one reason that I particularly like services like AWS. It's got so many services that you can choose from to build solutions. You think of them like Lego pieces, but it also emphasizes architecture. It's not, hey, here's a big smorgasbord of services that you can use, just throw them at your problem. AWS, it's got white papers. It really does strongly emphasize the 5 pillars. It strongly emphasizes sound architecture. So you've got to know what it is that you're architecting. And I think that's the key thing with implementing a data science strategy effectively in a business. What is it that you actually want it to do? And then you can actually look at how to architect some data science into that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And be interesting to get your perspective actually on, it's maybe a bit of a divide that I've identified in my sort of experience of the data science market and how effectively it is implemented. For these kind of older businesses that are probably a bit more steeped in heritage and tradition, however you want to define it, where tech hasn't necessarily been at the beating heart of the strategy of the business. It's kind of almost been a bit of a bolt-on function on the side of what the core service of what the business does. Seem to struggle a bit more in terms of actually implementing effective data science strategies where, because it feels often like it's a lot of winning hearts and minds to actually get the value. The stakeholders need to be engaged on the journey just as much as the data team wants to be rolling out some effective data science strategies. And obviously, if you don't do that, it's a bit doomed from the start. And we're sort of seeing a bit of a divide between businesses where maybe they're earlier stage, actually technology-driven businesses and kind of AI, whatever you want to define it as, data science, machine learning, whatever. It's kind of at the fundamental strategy. It's what the business does, and it's at the heart of the business. And those kind of businesses, in kind of my experience, not sort of black and white, but generally speaking, they do seem to have a healthier culture around, actually making it work, in some quite successful examples of what they have achieved in growing out some really quite formidable data science divisions. But have you kind of noticed anything similar around that? What would your sort of take be on, do you think you can actually implement a data science strategy into a business where they're a little bit, behind the curve technically, and it's not really that involved in what they do?
Oh, there's a sort of not infinite number. There's a huge. This is quite a high dimensional space to operate in here. So pulling on a couple of threads that you sort of dangled in front of me. I think actually, if you're a well-established business, then let's say you're an enterprise business. Let's say you're a big business. You've probably got some. They may not be amazing, but you'll have some sort of mature systems, some sort of mature processes in place. And at least if you've got that, then that is something that can be migrated. That is something that can be built upon. Hey, we've got these processes. We know what they are. They are things that can be sort of digitally data sort of enabled there. There are the newer startups, and very often, I think you're more likely to get this with the startups than with the older companies, if nothing else because of the consequence of when they were born. But the more recent companies, so the more startups, they're probably doing something more. They're more likely to be doing something in tech. So they're more likely to be a data-driven company anyway, which isn't to say that they've got great processes, but their product is perhaps more likely to be the data rather than selling paper clips and the data is an incidental thing there. So I think so for me, I see two particular divides, or two particular kind of worlds with a bit of a glass partition between them. One is the data science that is on like the business intelligence side of things, where you're dealing with the company's data and decisions will influence company processes. On the other hand, you've got data science that actually enables, that really drives the product itself, that is the product itself. And I think for me that those are the companies, the applications that appeal, I think, that bit more, because you're actually building a data science, machine learning, a data-driven application, rather than some sort of analytics come sort of data science function that's there to sort of augment business decisions.
Yeah, that's a really great point, actually, because I mean, it's going back to the point I was making earlier about how a lot of companies, rightly or wrongly, seem to have rebadged whatever existing data function they had and called it the data science team. When obviously we're speaking to candidates for the first time and obviously qualifying, because data science, clearly it's this huge umbrella that sits across a lot of different technologies and disciplines and techniques in data. And I guess we kind of always use a relatively crude, but I think quite effective measure of, where people's strengths lie, where they kind of identify and sort of add value in the data science sphere. And we sort of see these three kind of main pillars. You've got the analytics space, like you mentioned, and, kind of knowledge of visualization tools such as Power BI and ClickView and Shiny and all that kind of thing. And then you've got more of the actual software engineering, data engineering side of things that are more involved with, like say cloud architecture, maintaining data pipelines and that kind of things. And then you've got the actual statistical modeling, machine learning, algorithm development, ML side of it. And I guess we kind of see data science as a little bit of a Venn diagram of all of those things, and people obviously identify in different areas depending on what kind of backgrounds they've come from. But I'd be interested to know, in your hiring for a data scientist for your team, how do you assess what is a good actual data scientist versus a data engineer or someone that's come from analytics, or someone that's maybe just worked on the statistical side but hasn't actually got the experience of applying real world models? What sort of stands out to you as an exemplary or an exciting data scientist? What do you look for?
For me, I look less deeply technically than you might think. And what I mean there is, yes, Python or R, they're pretty much table stakes. Somebody said, oh, I could do whatever in Tableau or Excel. It's like, well, yeah, great, but that's not really sort of for us. So programming sort of ability or competence, comfort for sure, that's table stakes. But probably the fundamental thing is I actually really value creative, critical thinking above all else. So I don't care so much if you've got particular experience with sklearn. If you've got that basic programming competence, you could go to any documentation and say, okay, this is how I sort of use this API. In exactly the same way that when I came to Rezatec, I'd not really done anything with geospatial data, found myself using packages like Xarray and thinking, okay, how do I get this API to do what I want it to do? And you hit the documentation. But what I do care is that people value the data, and also so you have to love data, but also you have to know that you can't trust data as far as you can throw it. You really should treat your data like it. I heard this wonderful phrase, I think on a podcast some time ago, that you should really treat your data like it might jump out at you from behind a bush, because at some point your data will do that to you. So what I want is, if someone is working with me in my team, I want to know that when they give me something, when they do something, that I can trust it. That they've checked their own work because they've been thinking about it like this, rather than somebody that goes, well, I did this thing and it must be right because it's what, it's what the function produced.
Yeah.
So that's because I don't want to have to be double checking or knowing that I'm probably going to have to redo someone's work. I want someone that can think creatively, critically about the problem, even come up with a new way of tackling it, and that you can trust sort of what they do.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. It's a really sort of refreshing and quite pragmatic way of looking at it. We did a podcast a couple of weeks ago actually about people that cross train from a different industry and come into data science. Sort of on the thread of what I was talking about earlier. And the manager I was speaking to was he was actually from a mechanical engineering background and realised that a lot of the work he was doing was actually quite similar, and decided to go into data science. And yeah, he was basically saying that it's all about, you don't have to have come from a data science background to be good at it, but to have the skill set of critical thinking is probably the most important thing to him as well. And he said that's actually why he's been so successful in the world of data science in a relatively short space of time. And he actually has only been in the field for about 2 years, but it's had quite a meteoric success, and it's sort of risen up to the ranks of manager. And he was saying he actually sees it as a positive sometimes if someone hasn't necessarily got a master's or a PhD in data science, but they've come from a different field where they've shown that they can think about problem solve, and think about things logically and critically. The skills around the actual data science technology itself can be learned, and I think that's kind of a nice way of looking at it, really, and that's very true.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of opinions, or there's the emphasis of some programs that will aim to make you a data scientist in 6 months or whatever, and they drill you to death on, I don't know, the nitty gritty, or the deep going deeper and deeper on maybe gradient sort of descent algorithms or whatever. Oh, you need to be able to do this, you need to be able to sort of invert this matrix. Well, I don't really care for somebody who can just go sort of deeper and deeper into some arcane detail about some gradient descent method, or to be able to particularly argue for sort of Adam over some other approach. I want them to be able to tackle the right problem, and I think that is what 99% of people want. Because if you're Google, if you've got 1,000 people, which I was heard the other day, they've got something like 1,000 engineers working on TensorFlow. Okay, sure, they're probably not going to need to know necessarily the wider business context. They are there to drill down and optimize some particular bit, because for Google, it is worth it. That role is dedicated to drilling down in that particular aspect. For Google, it is worth refining performance by 1,000th of a decimal place of a percentage, because with their volume of business, that equates to $1 million a day, for example. Sure, but 99% of businesses, I'm absolutely convinced, would just benefit from a sound data strategy and people looking critically, creatively at the where data can sort of really help there, what a good solution is, because that good solution will most likely, for the vast majority of people, be one of the more classic machine learning algorithms.
Yeah, absolutely, I can see that. And I guess from your experiences so far, and having got to where you've got to in your data science career, if you were to, let's say you're a business now that is aware of data science and quite committed, at surface level to to implementing data science strategy for the business. What would you say the kind of key learns, and what advice would you give that company who's looking to build out a data science function from scratch? Are there any sort of key pieces of advice or key learns that you think would be worthwhile them taking on board?
I think for the overarching question is, are you ready to build out a data science team? Do you have a real clear picture of what your business strategy is? Do you have a data architecture, a good infrastructure there in place? That may mean that you've got data engineers in there. Is the data there? Is the infrastructure there? And what do you want that data science team to do? So ideally, you would have some clear problems defined that you would really like a data science team to do, that they could come in and start working on. And there's the data and there's the infrastructure there to do it, and it is aligned with your business strategy. I think that's the key thing, really, because you can't just get data scientists in and expect them to sprinkle this magic pixie dust around. They need to have a problem to work on, and that moves your business forwards, and they need to have the means to work on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very holistic approach, isn't it? I guess for it to be successful, and I think it's a really good point to labour, that it has to be, I guess with lots of things in life, but it has to be balanced, and it has to be a holistic approach for it to be successful. It's not a one-trick pony that's going to come in and transform without making the necessary commitments in other areas. So
it can depend on the size of the organisation as well, of course. If you're a small startup, then you may still be sort of shaping the actual question, the actual problem, and that's fine. But you should know that you're probably then looking for someone who can wear many hats, who can do some sort of data engineering, that can put a bit of infrastructure in place that can help you shape the business question, and then do something intelligent with that data. Over time, you would be looking at consolidating those roles because there would be more data engineering to do. So, get a proper sort of data engineer in place. On the other hand, if you're already a bigger organization, then you've probably already got, say, the data flowing around doing something. So make sure that you've got that data engineering in place to make that effective, so you got the right data in the right place, so that then you can bring in someone who would be a data scientist and mostly just wear that data science hat.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The roles, it's something we see in a lot of, it seems quite fluid in a lot of companies at the moment. It's quite rightly, I think it should be that way. But it's not like a lot of teams have, right, this is the data science team, this is the data engineering team. It does still seem it's quite fluid and interchangeable in terms of how companies are structuring that team and the sort of different roles and responsibilities. Because I guess it is a very quickly evolving market, isn't it? Constantly evolving. But I suppose on that note, I mean, what are you most excited about? You obviously talk about this AI, versus machine learning, and what is that actual concept? But what are you most excited about, as you kind of look to the future in terms of the world of AI, if that's what you want to call it at the moment? What are you kind of most excited about?
I'm very tempted to say I'm looking forward to people stopping talking about it.
Good answer.
Seriously, I would love to never hear that term again, ever.
AI.
Yes. There is the connotation that it's this magical thing, or it's machines thinking intelligently for themselves. Oh yes, let's sort of have this discussion about the AI singularity. So no, let's not. We're not in an Asimov robot novel just yet. But also, in a very pragmatic sense, you don't hear people really banging on about big data these days. Oh, you need to get, we need to get into big data, because it's just data now. People talk about data.
Mm.
Big data is not a special thing. It's just data. Why would you call it big? And I think in exactly the same way, rather than sort of any pet peeve about what, the interpretation or the connotation of AI, it would be great if that term would just fade away and we have elegant, efficient user interfaces, smooth business processes, all of which that provide a great, smooth customer experience.
Mm.
Rather than having to say new improved AI or AI driven or AI enabled, whatever that means, focus on the outcome. And if you looked under the hood, you might find that it's using a lot of the tech, or it's using algorithms that today we call AI, but it's just at the point where people don't even think to bother to call it AI, because it just is a great user interface or a great experience for the customer.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think AI, it's a terminology that it is very steeped in. It's very emotionally charged, I think, for a lot of people as well, isn't it? I mean, it is a huge buzzword, absolutely. But it's something that's just becoming, however you want to badge it, it is something that's being talked about so often and actually becoming a part of our lives. And I guess when we sort of look back at having this conversation with someone the other day about, how good a predictor of the future films like Back to the Future were, and actually how much of the stuff that was around then was prophesized for the future we've actually built today. But I guess it's kind of for the first time we're starting to get to the point now where all that stuff in the movies, it's kind of entering into our lives a little bit more under this banner of AI. But like you said, actually, genuinely speaking, in terms of how data science and machine learning and AI actually benefits our lives, other than talking to Alexa and telling her to order some more coffee pods, it is actually about user experience and automating processes and helping make our life more efficient. Absolutely. And
I think Alexa is a great. I love the example of Alexa, because if you pull on that thread, what actually is it? Where does AI come into this? So let's reduce that to machine learning. So machine learning, yes, you've got some voice recognition there. Alexa responds to the trigger word, and then it takes the waveform of your voice, and it's an amazing achievement over the last 10 years how speech recognition has come on. And it takes that waveform and it can translate that into words. That's a fantastic achievement. It's hardly AI. It's just a nice bit of machine learning to say, okay, I've decoded the words that the person just spoke. Then what happens? Well, what happens then is not AI. It is not some AI called Alexa that knows what you want. It is essentially a set of really dumb rules that take those words and then say, okay, this is the action I'm going to perform. And those words have to really be programmed by someone with, when they set up the Alexa skill.
Yeah.
So I think I love that example, because yes, you got some nice machine learning there to work out what the words were, but the rest of it is not AI.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Because there's no kind of continued learning, I guess, from that point onwards in terms of the models. It's not getting better at predicting efficiencies on things. Like I said, it's just it's a stimulus and response kind of system, but everybody associates it with AI because it's starting to be the way we're engaging with technology, and it's starting to take more of a human form, I guess, however you want to, an intelligent form. But like you said, yeah, to all intents and purposes, there isn't really a huge amount of ongoing machine learning involved in, it's not really a model, is it? In fairness, it's just it's more of a voice recognition system.
Well, I mean, the voice recognition bit is a model, and that's cool. But then the actions that are triggered as a result of that, it's very rule driven, very programmatic, really.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that I sort of dislike about the the AI term is, I actually saw this comment on a LinkedIn post just today, and it was, can AI be used to save our planet? And it kind of really bugs me, because people, humans, are the entities with agency here. You know, if anything is going to save the planet, it's us. You know, we can't say, oh, can AI save the planet for us? No, it's down to us. So to sort of imbue this AI with this with this agency, this idea that it's intelligent, is actually kind of pretty much an abrogation of our own responsibilities. AI, or the machine learning, AI is never going to solve those wider, dirtier problems for us. It is just computers and algorithms that are great at doing some number crunching, and as such, they can be fantastically good at doing exactly that. But we need to make sure that we get them to crunch the right numbers in the right way and give us an output that is fundamentally useful to us. And it's going to be up to us to act on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I agree. It's I guess a tool more than an intelligence, isn't it? And I think it's because people are starting to recognise now, like you say, with the likes of big data and whatever, but just the computational power, obviously, that machines have, in terms of being able to process data in a singular form. Obviously, it does far outweigh human ability, which I guess obviously people, there's that element of kind of fear about, to a degree, that it could sort of evolve from that point onwards. But like you said, intelligence it's contextual, isn't it? And obviously humans have the ability to marry together. I suppose you've got this whole argument about multimodal machine learning, and obviously now algorithms get into the level of sophistication where they can spot context and start interacting with each other and take different sort of forms of input to create links. But we're so far away from that point, aren't we, of getting to a level of intelligence, I guess, that's going to be in a position to be anywhere near equated to humans and what we can do. But is this kind of ongoing, interesting ethical debate, isn't there, about it? Is there a point at which it will, Terminator springs to mind.
I think a much better word to use for the A is augmented. What we've got, it's very much a means to augment what we do. You've got advanced, fundamentally aerodynamically unstable fighter aircraft that just would be impossible for a human to fly unaided. And so you could call it AI, but you've got a computer system there that takes care of, the fine detail of trimming the aerodynamics of the aircraft. That's augmenting, but you've still got the pilot.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Yeah, very, very interesting points. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating chat, Guy, and thanks very much for coming on. I always like to finish every podcast by asking a question that I stole from Rich Reed, which is basically asking somebody for they've got a favourite piece of advice or a favourite kind of go-to piece of advice that they like to share with their fellow human whenever they can. Have you got anything that springs to mind that's a go-to favourite of yours?
This is I will have, and I will think of it probably about 5 minutes after we end this call. Give us a help. Any particular sort of application or sort of walk of life or context?
Not really. The book is the book I read was If I Could Tell You One Thing by a guy called Rich Reed, who actually created the Innocent Smoothie. The Innocent Smoothies brand. He created that, and he wrote this quite interesting book. It's quite sort of a digestible little read that he went around to all the famous people in the world and kind of sort of asked them what's the one piece of advice as to why you've been so successful in doing what you've done. And the they're very wide ranging in terms of, you know, bits of feedback. Like Bill Clinton, for instance, his favorite piece of advice is just be genuine and authentic and nice to everybody you meet, not just, you know, remember people that you pay attention to everybody basically you meet. Don't sort of ignore people that you don't think are the important people, and just things like that really, if there's any kind of life lessons. But I guess in this sort of application, if there's one piece of advice maybe that's relevant to the theme of today's podcast around growing a team, if there's one overarching piece of advice, that would be I'm sure very, very beneficial to share as well.
Well, I think one of my sort of, I suppose, favourite bits of just general pithy advice would be to quote Bill Hicks, which I won't do on this publication. I'll just leave people to sort of that might know it, or to sort of go and search for themselves. But it's basically a singular piece of advice on not to be something.
I think I know what that is.
Yeah. But yeah, otherwise, I think that genuineness. I think maybe even the time for sort of schools and education establishments training to have the role of training the next generation of filing clerks, of civil servants, to sort of fit in their place in society and take work from their inbox and do the standard thing to it and put it in their outbox. That's pretty much largely, you know, those days are sort of pretty much in the past now. And so I think there's definitely, picking up on your sort of theme of being genuine, everybody can bring unique contributions, unique viewpoints to something. So, and I get students saying, how should I handle this missing value? How should I treat this? You know, what should I do at this point? And giving them a specific thing to do is impossible, because there's not generally a singular right answer there. You need to be sort of true to yourself. You need to bring those unique combinations to sort of a place, because that is where you can bring a real contribution. I've not, rightly or wrongly, sort of, for, you know, with the successes and failures I've not had my successes really because I've done necessarily what someone else wanted to be done, what I thought was the standard thing to do. It's having that idea of, this is the strategy, this is what we want to do, this is what I think should be done, and going with that. So, you know, when a student says, what should I do here? I think it's valid to say, well, what do you think you should do here? Because this is where by kind of doing your own thing, by having the confidence to do your own thing, I think you can actually bring some real strengths to organizations, because they will get nowhere if they already knew exactly what they wanted you to do and just wanted you to do it. They should probably have just got a computer program to do it. So you are there to do something unique, so do it.
Yeah, yes, that's great advice. Absolutely, yeah. And that's certainly something I subscribe to as well. I mean, not only is it I think it's a good management tool to ask to somebody to get to the answer themselves and think about it rather than being, you know, fed the answer. But I also genuinely agree with you that often by somebody taking their own course of action, you know, psychologically they're a lot more likely to follow through on it, and they're going to pursue it with a lot more volition, because it's empowering, isn't it, and giving people the autonomy to move forward. And it's exactly the way, you know, one of the core values of TrueNorth as a business is all about innovation. All right, I've got 13 years experience in tech recruitment, but I'm not going to sit here and say I know everything about it and this is the only way we're ever going to do it. And I welcome people that are coming into the business day one to come with any fresh ideas about anything they think they can help, you know, and anything that they want to do. I think that's really how most businesses should operate in terms of, you know, evolution and innovation of ideas. You know, if you so you can avoid a Kodak moment at somewhere down the line.
Oh yeah. But yeah, the innovation thing's a good example. It's like, yeah, we value innovation. I want you to innovate, and I want you to innovate in exactly the way that I think you should.
Yeah, you innovate, but within this little box, please.
Yes. Innovate as long as it's exactly what I want you to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for to being with us today and sharing some really interesting perspective, really interesting thoughts. And yeah, I look forward to keeping in touch. And I guess that's a wrap on the episode of Guy².
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Take care. See you soon.
Cheers. Bye.